In the roaring 1970s, as motorcycle sales soared from 198,000 to over 5 million, one man rode at the forefront of a criminal empire that would shake America to its core. Clarence Butch Crouch.
Joined because of a brotherhood. One family, one big family, and we'd all help each other. You know, it was something that we'd all grow old and be proud of, you know, a brotherhood.
Under Crouch's leadership, the Cleveland chapter alone was responsible for at least 15 murders and 10 million in illegal activities by 1975.
The Hells Angels in Cleveland thought that they were going to dominate, and it was just a matter of time.
In 1971, the Hells Angels got rid of most of their competition.
His reign of terror earned Cleveland the grim title of bombing capital of America, with 37 explosions in a single year.
Cleveland really became a war zone. In 1 year alone, there were 37 bombings.
But then Crouch did the unthinkable when no one expected it. He turned on his own people.
Butch Crouch turned himself in and told of the crimes he'd committed with the Hells Angels.
But what drives a man to build an empire on violence, only to tear it down? Crouch's testimony would lead to over 100 arrests, dismantling nearly 30% of the Hells Angels criminal enterprises nationwide.
He testified that drugs, torture, rape, and kidnapping are part of everyday life in the Hells Angels.
Butch walked in and he gave them everything. They didn't have a case on him when he decided to roll. He just rolled.
Was he a cold-hearted traitor or a man seeking redemption?
He told on himself. He told about the other murders, and he told on the murders he committed too. And he went to prison for that. He didn't have to. He could have walked away from the club and not said a word. So he's not a rat. He's a person trying to save his soul, somehow, some way.
This is the story of the angel who fell from grace, a tale that continues to haunt the 3,000 Hells Angels members across 59 countries to this day. Stick around. The 1970s in America was a time of rebellion and freedom, especially for those who found solace on the open road.
Butch Crouch was born in 1940 in Shreveport, Louisiana, in the sort of background that really attracted people to the biker culture and that lifestyle.
With motorcycle sales skyrocketing from 198,000 in 1960 to over 5 million by 1975, the biker culture was in full swing. Motorcycles roared down endless highways, their riders feeling the wind in their hair and the promise of adventure around every bend. But beneath this romantic veneer of biker culture, a darker undercurrent was brewing. At the heart of this storm was the infamous Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, founded in 1948. By the 1970s, they had over 100 chapters worldwide, and at its epicenter stood a man named Clarence Butch Crouch. Now, Butch Crouch isn't your typical average American. He was born in 1940 in Shreveport, Louisiana, a city with a poverty rate of 25% at the time.
Butch Crouch was born in 1940 in Shreveport, Louisiana, in the sort of background that really attracted people to the biker culture and that lifestyle.
He came from a background that seemed tailor-made for the biker lifestyle.
He grew up in a dysfunctional family. His mother was deaf. His father died. So Butch had a very hardened view of the world.
By 19, he had already done time in a Texas prison as one of the 196,441 inmates in state and federal prisons in 1960.
By the time he was 19, he got into a brawl, and he did a few years in a Texas prison.
This tough upbringing and his time behind bars would shape the man who would later become a driving force in the Hells Angels.
When you grow up in a place that's economically depressed, the Hells Angels looks very attractive. That's their opportunity to be a part of something that promises an exciting life.
For what drew Butch to the Angels? Was it just the allure of the bikes and the open road? Or was it something deeper? A need for belonging, for family, for purpose? Whatever his reasons, Butch's decision to patch in with the Hells Angels would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but for the entire club, which by the mid-1970s had an estimated membership of 2,500 across the United States.
I joined because of a brotherhood. We were one family, one big family, and we'd all help each other. You know, it was something that we'd all grow old and be proud of, you know, a brotherhood.
Little did Butch know when he first donned that infamous Death's Head patch that he would play a pivotal role in transforming the Hells Angels from a group of hard-partying bikers into something far more sinister. In 1970, Cleveland, Ohio, a city of 750,903 people at the time, became ground zero for a major expansion of the Hells Angels. Sonny Barger, the notorious founder and president of the Oakland chapter, had a vision to transform the Angels from a California phenomenon into a national force. To achieve this ambitious goal, Barger needed a man who was tough, charismatic, and utterly devoted to the cause. And he found that man in Butch Crouch.
In 1970, Sonny Barger wanted to expand the Hells Angels nationally. So he sent Butch Crouch to organize the Cleveland chapter, increase the size of the Cleveland chapter, and of course increase their power. And their power would come from selling drugs.
Crouch arrived in Cleveland with a clear mission: grow the chapter, increase its power, and establish the Angels as the dominant force in the Midwest. But he knew that growth meant more than just swelling their ranks with warm bodies.
When Butch came to Cleveland, he came here to recruit people, recruit good people. He had that ability to size people up and recognize aspects in their personality that were beneficial to the Hells Angels. Intelligence, cunning, loyalty, the ability to be violent at the drop of a hat. Fortunately,
it meant building a criminal empire that could rival the traditional mafia families that had long controlled Cleveland's underworld, estimated to be worth over $100 million annually in illegal activities. Under Butch's leadership, the Cleveland chapter quickly gained a reputation for brutality and efficiency. They moved beyond the typical biker activities of drinking and brawling and into more lucrative ventures like drug trafficking, extortion, and contract killings.
Some new members, Sonny wanted Butch to use the Angels to get rid of some of the other clubs that were in Cleveland, because each of those clubs would be selling methamphetamine. So it was about drugs, it was about territory. They would beat them up, intimidate them, and they would do what they needed to do to take over the market. One step at a time, one club at a time, one individual at a time.
The chapter's annual revenue from illegal activities was rumored to exceed $5 million by 1975. Butch's military-style approach to organization and his willingness to use extreme violence to achieve his goals made the Cleveland Angels a force to be reckoned with.
The Hells Angels in Cleveland thought that they were going to dominate, and it was just a matter of time.
In 1971, the Hells Angels got rid of most of their competition.
But this rapid expansion and shift towards organized crime came at a cost. The Brotherhood that had once defined the Hells Angels was being replaced by a cutthroat business model where loyalty was measured in dollars rather than bonds of friendship. Butch, who had once sought belonging in the Angels, now found himself at the helm of an organization that was losing its soul. As the Cleveland chapter grew in power and influence, tensions with rival clubs began to escalate. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything, not just for Butch and the Cleveland Angels, but for the entire criminal landscape of the Midwest. On a fateful night in 1971, the Polish Women's Hall at 2159 Broadway Avenue in Cleveland became the site of one of the most infamous events in biker history. What was supposed to be a simple motorcycle show, a chance for riders to show off their custom choppers and chrome, turned into a bloodbath that would cement the Hells Angels' reputation as the most feared biker gang in America.
That space there was the Polish Women's Hall. It was a Polish neighborhood, and they would have events there. They decided to have a bike show to show trophy motorcycles, custom motorcycles. The Hells Angels had several bikes in the show.
The trouble began when members of a rival club, the Breed, showed up in force.
These breeds, they'd been riding together for a while. Around 1970, they came to Cleveland, they put patches on just about every little Honda rider all over town. They started just building up their numbers real big.
Tensions between the two groups had been simmering for months, fueled by territorial disputes and competition in the drug trade, estimated to be worth over $20 million annually in Cleveland alone. Butch Crouch and his Angels found themselves vastly outnumbered, with over 100 Breed members facing off against barely 24 Angels.
There was an off-duty officer working the event. He called the district saying, "It looks like there's going to be trouble." I was one of those officers dispatched to help. Upon my arrival, one thing that popped out, there were a lot more Breed than there were Hells Angels.
But Butch had an ace up his sleeve. Many of his Angels were Vietnam veterans, hardened by war and trained in combat tactics. As the situation escalated, these battle-tested bikers put their military training to use.
Vietnam did help the Hells Angels recruiting.
The bond that forms in the military, it's more than a friendship. We're a brotherhood. There were a number of other clubs, but people coming from the military would want to go to the Hells Angels because you want to join the best.
A lot of Vietnam vets were in the Hells Angels at the time.
What followed was less a brawl and more a coordinated assault. The violence was swift and brutal. Knives flashed in the dim light of the hall, and the sound of breaking bottles and shattering furniture was punctuated by screams of pain and rage.
I saw somebody jump very quickly, and then everybody was fighting around me.
The screaming, some crying, the panic. Crouch gutted somebody. One of the Breed, he gutted him to his teeth.
You could see knives flashing, people were dropping to the ground, trails of blood all over, and the knife wounds were focused on the back.
The Angels had emerged victorious.
But unbeknownst to the Breed, there were a number of other Angels from other chapters, not in colors, that had surrounded them. So what started the Breed were taken by surprise, and they suffered many casualties. They were men against boys. They didn't know what was happening.
And when the dust settled, 5 people lay dead, and 22 more were injured.
5 persons were killed and 22 injured last night when 2 motorcycle gangs fought during a motorcycle show in Cleveland.
The Polish Women's Hall Massacre marked a turning point for Butch and the Cleveland Angels. They had crossed a line, moving from rowdy outlaws to cold-blooded killers.
There was a quote from Sonny Barker that said, in the 60s, we just had a lot of fun and games and a lot of partying. And then in the 70s, they became gangsters.
The event sent shockwaves through the biker world and put law enforcement on high alert. For Butch, it was a grim confirmation of his power and influence. But it also marked the beginning of a darker chapter in his life, one that would eventually lead to his downfall.
After the Polish Women's Hall, people feared them. They established themselves very firmly as, we're the boss.
In the aftermath of the Polish Women's Hall Massacre, many of the Hells Angels involved, including Butch Crouch, found themselves behind bars awaiting trial.
56 motorcycle gang members were formally charged with first-degree murder in Cleveland today, following that fight between rival gangs at a cycle show last Saturday.
They went to jail and they were there for about 7-8 months.
It was during this time that a seemingly innocuous event occurred that would have far-reaching consequences for the entire organization. Someone smuggled in a copy of Mario Puzo's novel, The Godfather, which had sold over 21 million copies since its release in 1969.
They were reading books, Yeah, The Godfather come out.
The Godfather had a big impact on a lot of people.
As the book made its rounds through the cell block, the incarcerated angels became entranced by Puzo's portrayal of the mafia. They saw parallels between the Corleone family's loyalty, their code of silence, and their own brotherhood. But more than that, they saw a blueprint for transforming their motorcycle club into a sophisticated criminal empire.
While in jail, someone obtains a copy of The Godfather, and it's read and passed around.
They fell in love with the whole lore of the mafia, and they were able to take a lot of those philosophies and ideologies.
To become a made member of the mafia, you have to commit a murder.
Butch, always the strategist, was particularly taken with the ideas presented in the novel. He began to envision the Hells Angels not just as a group of rowdy bikers, but as a structured organization with a clear hierarchy, diversified criminal interests, and a code of conduct that would ensure loyalty and silence.
They sit there and look around the cell block and they realize we've already done that. So they realized if you have an organization where everyone is bonded by murder, the person who commits the murder is not going to turn on the club. That ensures silence and that ensures loyalty.
One of the most significant changes to come out of this period was the introduction of a new initiation ritual known as rolling your bones. Inspired by the mafia's practice of requiring a murder for membership, Butch and the other leaders decreed that prospective members would have to kill someone to earn their patch.
It all became secret and organized. A new member, when he joins a club, he has to kill someone. He has 6 months to roll his bonds. And if they renege on that, then they're killed. Because then he knows too much.
In The Godfather, they make their bones, bikers roll their bones.
If you're willing to do this, then you're willing to be a brother for life.
It was a closely guarded secret. New members are required to roll your bones, required to kill.
The Godfather Effect, as it came to be known within the club, transformed the Hells Angels from a loose association of rebellious bikers into a highly organized criminal syndicate. Under Butch's guidance, the Cleveland chapter became a model for this new approach. With clearly defined roles, strict discipline, and a diversified portfolio of criminal activities, ranging from drug trafficking to contract killings. By 1975, it was estimated that the Cleveland chapter alone was responsible for at least 15 murders and over $10 million in annual illegal revenue.
Then the outlaw war came along, and the killings just kind of got out of hand.
To go after the outlaws, they put together a Taking Care of Business Fund, TCB. The Cleveland chapter used that money to travel around the country, killing for other chapters. If you had a problem, no matter what chapter you were, you called Cleveland and business was taken care of. They created a murder cult.
By the mid-1970s, the Hells Angels became much more of an organized criminal syndicate.
The chapters have a president, a vice president, a treasurer, secretary, a sergeant at arms. And after the Polish Women's Hall, they appointed someone, an intelligence officer.
Intelligence officer was established back in '73, and it was an office to gather all the information they could on any club in the United States, any police officer, any newsman, anybody that the Hells Angels had a grudge against.
Matt Zaniskar was viewed as one of the people who was collecting information on us being the police officers. People don't understand the ability they have to collect information. One person reported the sky being illuminated just before the explosion. Some of the other witnesses also reported hearing individuals laughing and running away just before the blast.
Cleveland earned a grim new nickname, the bombing capital of America. The city was rocked by a series of explosions that seemed to target everyone from rival gang members to innocent civilians.
Both his legs are blowed off. That man will never walk no more long as he lives.
In 1975 alone, Cleveland witnessed 37 bombings, more than any other U.S. city that year. At the center of this reign of terror stood Butch Crouch and his Hells Angels.
Cleveland really became a war zone. In 1 year alone, there were 37 bombings.
The Angels had discovered a new and terrifying weapon in their arsenal: explosives. Thanks to connections with disillusioned Vietnam veterans and corrupt military personnel, they had access to military-grade ordnance that could level buildings and vaporize vehicles. It was estimated that the Angels had acquired over 1,000 pounds of explosives from various sources. Butch, with his strategic mind, saw the potential in this new form of violence. Bombings were impersonal, could be carried out from a distance, and often left little evidence for investigators to work with. But the violence soon spiraled out of control.
One of the most notorious bombings took place on January 7th, 1975. And it will have an impact on Butch Crouch that reverberates for a very long time.
How bombing intended for a rival gang member instead claimed the lives of Shirley Sigley and her 8-year-old son, Dustin. The deaths of an innocent mother and child shocked the city and brought intense scrutiny from law enforcement. Even hardened criminals like Butch were shaken by the incident. For Butch, the Sigley bombing was a turning point.
To the senseless killing of women and children, they're not the same as they used to be. They just kind of tore it, and they got away from the Brotherhood.
He had always justified his actions by telling himself that they only targeted other criminals, people who had chosen to live outside the law. But the deaths of Shirley and her son shatter that illusion. For the first time, Butch was forced to confront the full horror of what he and the Angels had become.
He's thinking about the repercussions of it. And not criminal repercussions, but he's thinking about the moral repercussions. He began to question what he was doing and what the Hells Angels were doing.
As the bombings continued and the body count rose, Butch found himself increasingly troubled by his role in the violence.
And the irony of all ironies, Butch helped create that requirement. In many ways, Butch Crouch was a victim of his own creation.
He had joined the Hells Angels, seeking brotherhood and freedom, but now found himself at the helm of an organization that was bringing terror and death to an entire city. The seeds of doubt were planted, and they would grow into a crisis of conscience that would ultimately lead to Butch's downfall. As the 1970s drew to a close, Butch Crouch found himself at a crossroads. The man who had once been the driving force behind the Cleveland Hells Angels' rise to power was now grappling with a crisis of conscience. The bombings, the murders, the endless cycle of violence, it had all become too much.
Someone from Cleveland had come up and stayed with the Minnesota Hells Angels. They was worried about Butch. He tells me, we can't find Butch. We hadn't seen him since USA run. He's been gone that long. He was very worried about it, I should say.
Seeking guidance, Butch reached out to his old mentor, Ralph "Sonny" Barger, who had founded the Oakland chapter in 1957. But the conversation only deepened his disillusionment. Barger's advice was cold and pragmatic.
Sonny said, we're all in it for ourselves now, so do what you gotta do.
Sonny tells him, there is no brotherhood. Take the money and run, because one day this is all going to collapse, and only those with money will not be in prison.
These words shattered what remained of Butch's faith in the Hells Angels.
He's hearing from the leader of the Hells Angels that everything that you thought you believed in, all the ideals that you really pledged your life for, really never existed.
That's the thing that pushed him over the edge.
Tell the guards to let the people in as quick as you can. We got to get started.
Tormented by guilt and fear, Butch made a decision that would send shockwaves through the entire Hells Angels organization. He turned himself into the authorities.
Butch Crouch turned himself in and told of the crimes he'd committed with the Hells Angels.
But this was no ordinary plea bargain. Butch didn't just confess to his own crimes. He laid bare the entire structure of the Hells Angels criminal empire, which by then was estimated to be involved in over $1 billion worth of illegal activities annually across the United States.
He testified that drugs, torture, rape, and kidnapping are part of everyday life in the Hells Angels.
Butch walked in and he gave them everything. They didn't have a case on him when he decided to roll. He just rolled.
Butch's testimony was a goldmine for law enforcement. He revealed the inner workings of the club, from their initiation rituals to their most closely guarded secrets. He detailed murders, bombings, drug operations, and corrupt dealings with judges and police officers. His information provided a roadmap for prosecutors and investigators, giving them unprecedented insight into the world of outlaw bikers.
He told on himself. He told about the other murders, and he told on the murders he committed too. And he went to prison for that. He didn't have to. He could have walked away from the club and not said a word. So he's not a rat. He's a person trying to save his soul, somehow, some way.
For the Hells Angels, Butch's betrayal was catastrophic. Members across the country found themselves facing indictments based on his testimony. The Cleveland chapter, once the crown jewel of the Angels' criminal empire, was decimated by arrests and convictions. In total, Butch's testimony led to over 100 arrests and dozens of convictions. But for Butch, the decision to come clean brought a different kind of freedom. Though he would spend years in prison for his crimes, he found a measure of peace in finally confronting the truth of what he had done. He had lost his wings, but in doing so, he had reclaimed his soul. The fallout from Butch Crouch's testimony was immediate and far-reaching. Law enforcement agencies across the country used his information to launch a coordinated assault on the Hells Angels criminal operations. Dozens of high-ranking members were arrested, including several who had seemed untouchable. The FBI estimated that Butch's testimony led to the dismantling of nearly 30% of the Hells Angels criminal enterprises nationwide.
This was probably the most significant accomplishment regarding outlaw motorcycle gangs in the country. It helped us put together some criminal prosecutions.
For the Angels, Butch became the ultimate traitor, a Judas who had betrayed the sacred trust of the Brotherhood. His name was struck from club records, his exploits erased from their oral history. To speak of Butch Crouch within the club became taboo, a sin punishable by expulsion or worse.
When you found out that Butch had fled, how did you feel?
It was devastating. It was devastating. It almost started fights amongst the members because they had faith in him, and he betrayed the patch and the people that wore it.
But even as the Angels tried to erase Butch from their memory, his legacy continued to shape the organization. The club became even more secretive, more paranoid about infiltration. The bonds of trust that had once defined the Angels were replaced by suspicion and fear. Every new prospect was viewed as a potential informant, every longtime member a possible weak link. Butch himself spent several years in prison for his crimes. Upon his release in the early 1990s,
he's relocated to Texas, and he lives a very unassuming life. He remarries and he suffers from ill health, always worried that the Hells Angels are going to exact revenge for his betrayal.
In his final years, Butch grappled with the weight of his actions, both as a Hells Angel and as an informant. He had found a measure of redemption in telling the truth, but the guilt of his past crimes never fully left him. He died on July 8, 2013, at the age of 72, taking many secrets to his grave.
Authorities have identified the victims in an apparent double murder-suicide. 85-year-old Vivian Dome and her son, 61-year-old Willard Landry, were found Monday morning inside their burning home. 73-year-old Paul Dome was found in a nearby vehicle.
When he passed, I was told there actually was a party celebrating his demise by the Hells Angels.
How did you feel when you heard that he died?
It's over. He killed his wife and killed himself and put the house on fire. It was over. The end.
Decades after Butch Crouch's betrayal, his shadow still looms large over the world of outlaw bikers. To law enforcement, he remains one of the most significant informants in the history of organized crime investigations. His testimony not only brought down key figures in the Hells Angels, but also provided a template for future investigations into outlaw motorcycle gangs.
Without Butch, we may never have learned any of this. Butch did reveal the acts of the Hells Angels. He did spill their secrets. He did the right thing.
For the Hells Angels themselves, Butch Crouch represents a turning point in their history. His betrayal forced the organization to evolve, becoming more secretive and sophisticated in their operations. The Angels of today bear little resemblance to the rowdy band of misfits that Butch joined in the 1960s. They have become a global organization with chapters in dozens of countries, always walking a fine line between their outlaw image and their criminal reality. As of 2021, it's estimated that the Hells Angels have around 3,000 members in 59 countries. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Butch Crouch is the questions his story raises about the nature of loyalty, redemption, and the human capacity for change. Was Butch a villain who betrayed his brothers, or a man seeking redemption for his crimes? Was his decision to testify an act of cowardice or of courage? These questions have no easy answers, but they continue to fascinate those who study outlaw culture. Butch's story serves as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of society, the potential for redemption exists. It challenges us to consider the complex moral choices faced by those who live outside the law and the heavy price they pay for their decisions.
Before Butch Crouch came forward, law enforcement did not understand the world of the Hells Angels. Butch's information provided a roadmap, an overview of how the Hells Angels operated.
In the end, Butch Crouch was neither hero nor villain, but a flawed, complex human being who found himself caught up in events larger than himself. His story continues to resonate because it speaks to universal themes of belonging, betrayal, and the search for meaning in a chaotic world. As long as there are those who are drawn to the outlaw lifestyle, the cautionary tale of Butch Crouch, the angel who fell from grace, will continue to be told.